Hi, I'm Annalee, and this is my YouTube knitting journal. My name is Annalee, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I have 3 large dogs, 2 teenage children, and 1 handsome Latino husband. I also have way too much yarn. In today's episode, or journal entry, I am going to talk about my plan for trying to tackle this insanely large yarn stash that I have. What I did is I gathered together all of my sweater quantities of yarn that I already have projects picked out for. I already know what patterns that I want to knit, and they're just waiting for their turn to be knit up. It turns out I have 45 unknit sweaters. That's a lot of sweaters. It's not a comfortable feeling to have that much accumulated in yarn just sitting around waiting to be knit. I want to maximize the joy that I get out of yarn. And while it's fun to purchase yarn and to plan projects, I get even more joy out of knitting projects, either for myself or often for people that I love. So I'm not going to completely restrict myself from buying new yarn or working on other projects, new projects that may come out that catch my eye. But I do want to commit to working on these 45 sweaters that have been sitting around and waiting for me. I do knit quite a bit, and I think I can knit 15 of these sweaters every year so that I could tackle this entire stash within 3 years. It's a little bit ambitious. I'm not going to beat myself up if I can't do it, but I'm going to give it a try. In order to make it just a little bit more exciting, I decided to let a small Python program that I wrote use a random number generator to tell me which project I will cast on next. And once that's done, I'll run the program again, and it will tell me my next project, and so on and so on. So in this episode, I'm going to show you all 45 of these patterns that I want to knit, the yarn that I plan to use, and then at the end, I'm going to run my program, and I get to learn what I'm going to cast on tonight. Before we get started, let me tell you about what I'm wearing. This is a pattern called the Dot Sweater by Knitting for Olive. Now, there are lots of knitters that rave about the Knitting for Olive yarn. It's probably fabulous, but I've never used it myself. I have, however, knit several Knitting for Olive patterns, and I definitely love them. I might even say that's my favorite designer at this point. So this pattern called for a strand of fingering weight held with a strand of mohair or silk mohair, but I just knit it out of a DK weight yarn from John Arbon Textiles. It's a line called Knit by Numbers DK. So Knit by Numbers comes in many, many different colors, and for each color, it comes in multiple shades that are achieved by blending more and more or more or less plain white fiber with the dyed fiber before it's spun. So I have 6 different shades of green yarn in this pattern, and I started with the lightest color down to the darkest color, and I really like the effect that it made. The cream color background yarn is also from the same line, the John Arbon Knit by Numbers DK. One thing about this yarn that I really loved is that it really fluffed up after being blocked, probably more so than any other yarn that I've ever used. I do have my phone with me because I'm going to refer to my Ravelry queue for the list of the designers and names of all of the patterns. I've also linked to my Ravelry queue below in case there's anyone that wants to take a look at these 45 sweaters waiting to be knit up. One more thing before we get started. I'm going to give a blanket disclaimer right now that I'm probably going to mispronounce several of these pattern names and designer names. I'm going to do my best, but instead of apologizing with every single one that I get to, consider this my blanket apology for the poor pronunciation. All right, it's going to take a while to get through all 45 sweaters, so let's get started. Number 1 is a pattern called Titta, and it's by Marcel et Clos. I plan to knit it in this yarn from a company called Stonehenge Fiber Mill, and this is their shepherd's wool worsted. It's a pretty bright color. I love bright colors, and there's a lot of bright colors in this yarn stash that I have. Number 2 is a pattern by My Favorite Things Knitwear. It is vest number 2, spring edition. I would like to knit this pattern with 2 different kinds of yarn from La Bien Amie. So it's the same colorway. One of the yarns is called Cashmerino. It's a cashmere merino blend. And the other yarn is called Kumo, and it's a blend of Surrey alpaca and silk. I think a vest is something that I would get a lot of use out of, but I don't have any vests in my wardrobe yet. For number 3, I want to knit a pattern by Tanis Lavallee called Metropolis. And I've actually knit this pattern before. I loved it. I used a fade set, and that's what I'm going to do again. I have some lovely yarn from Hedgehog Fibers. This is the Twist Sock yarn. And these are actually only 3 of 9 skeins that I got as part of one of their clubs. And it forms one continuous fade. Now, I'm a sucker for yarn fades. I have several projects that I've done in faded yarn, and come to think of it, the one that I'm wearing is a fade to some extent too. What I'm going to do for this project is I'm going to hold 3 strands of the hedgehog yarn, and one by one I'll swap out strands with the next color in the fade, and I'll hold it together with a mohair silk blend. This is called Silk Hair from Lana Grossa. Number 4 on my list is a pattern by Nora Gone. This is a pattern that was published in a magazine in the 90s, but I thought the design was really cool. It has this very large dragonfly made out of cables and lace that I tracked down an old copy of this magazine and bought it for this pattern. The thing is, I don't know if I would wear a large tunic, which is the garment that this pattern makes. So my plan is to actually knit another pattern called the Pure Comfort Cardigan by Andrea Yetman and incorporate the large dragonfly on the back. I have another bright color for this project. This is called Wasco DK from a company called Araucania. Number 5 is a pattern by Caitlin Hunter. Now there are many Caitlin Hunter patterns on my list because several years ago I bought, I think it was 5, maybe even more different patterns from her. There was some kind of a promotion where if you bought a certain number of patterns from her at the same time, you got a discount. And I loved a lot of her designs, so I went ahead and did that. This pattern, number 5, is called Guthrie. And I am going to knit it with these 2 yarns. The black yarn is by Cascade Yarns. It's just called Cascade BFL. And I've never knit with blue-faced Leicester wool before, so I'm looking forward to giving it a try. The color work is going to be done out of Feederbrook Farms. This is called Entropy DK in these bright neon colors. Now this is one of those yarns where there are plies of different colors that are then spun together, and there's kind of these long gradual color changes. I'm sure other knitters out there are aware of another pretty popular yarn company that has yarn in this style. I think between the neon and the black, it's going to be a very striking garment. A lot of fun. For number 6 on my list, I'd like to knit the Throwover by Andrea Mowry. You may have guessed at what that other yarn company I mentioned is. It is Spin Cycle. Spin Cycle Yarns is located just a couple hours north of me in Bellingham, Washington. And over the summer, I went up there and went to their storefront. I think it's called Spin Cycle Supply Company. And I decided to splurge and treat myself with some beautiful yarns in that shop. So I'm going to do the color work for the Throwover with these 3 shades of Spin Cycle, and the main color is going to be this dark teal color. This is Magpie Fibers Nest Worsted. Number 7 on my list is a pattern called Gridlines from Suzanne Summer. I've admired her designs for some time, but I have yet to knit one, so I'm looking forward to this one. I plan to do a short sleeve version so that it's more of a summery garment. And I'm going to use this yarn from Miss Babs. This is called Miss Babs Yummy 2-ply. Sweater number 8 is going to use a new to me technique, and that is steeking. This pattern is called the Maya Cardigan by Helene Magnuson. And if I remember correctly, this is actually a free pattern. I am going to use this Harrisfield Designs Highland. I've read a little bit about this company and it intrigues me. It's American wool. It's an old-fashioned mill that it might even be the oldest mill in the United States that's still operating. I also have a little bit extra blue from a previous project that I can use for some of the color work. Number 9. This is a pattern called Stripes Gone Crazy by Alpha Knits. It has this really intriguing design with stripes that are diagonal and varying in width, and they're formed by short rows. Roxanne Richardson made one of these sweaters and she wears it sometimes on her YouTube channel, and I just love it. I can't wait to see how this effect is achieved. I'm going to use some more Miss Babs Yummy 2-ply. I have some mini skeins and then a nice cream color for a main color. I'm going to be a little bit short on yarn, I think, or it's going to be cutting it close. So I will likely end up making this sweater in a smaller size, and then somebody like my daughter or someone else that is smaller than me can enjoy wearing it. Number 10 is a pattern by Isabel Kramer called Humulus. Humulus is apparently the botanical name for the hops plant, what they use to make beer. And I love the idea of having a beer-themed sweater that I can wear out to pub crawls or go to small microbreweries with my husband. To knit it, I'm going to use some unspun yarn. This is Plotulopi by Istex. And it's going to be my first time using an unspun yarn. I've heard great things about it, and that it especially works well for color work like this sweater has. Number 11 is a pattern that was very popular a few years ago, and I bought the pattern right away, but I haven't had a chance to knit it yet. This is Sorrel by Wool and Pine. Now, for this pattern, I'm going to use some yarn that I actually dyed myself. I don't know a lot about dyeing yarn. It just looked like something that would be fun to do, so I bought a few colors of some powdered acid dyes and some citric acid and some undyed yarn from Knit Picks. This is Knit Picks Hawthorn, and it's a fingering weight undyed. Basically, I just threw some beautiful colors into a pan with some yarn, let it cook up. So it remains to be seen how this is going to look knit up into a sweater. But to tie it together, I am going to pair it with a mohair or a mohair silk blend. This is Aloft by Knit Picks. And it might turn out a little bright and crazy, but I'm going to give it a go. Number 12 on my list is another Caitlin Hunter pattern. It's called the Ninilchik Swancho. And I'd like to knit it out of this yarn from Miss Babs. This is called Yowza. It's a DK weight yarn. So I have these three coordinating 50-gram skeins, and then for the main color, just some subtly gray white. Number 13 is a pattern by Isabel Kramer, and it's called Alpengluen. I guess that is the German word for alpenglow. If you're a knitter, you're probably aware that there was a very popular pattern released last year called Alpenglow. But this is a completely different pattern. I've had it for several years. I've actually knit this pattern before. I made one for my best friend in a different color. And I want to make another one for myself out of this green yarn. This is Rios from Malabrigo. I think it'll be fun for my best friend and I to have the same sweater but knit in different colors. So we're kind of matching, but not over the top. Number 14 is a pattern by Petite Knit. Now, Petite Knit is a very popular designer for good reason, I think. She's got some lovely designs, and I do have several of her patterns on my list. Number 14 is the Sunday Sweater Mohair Edition, and I want to knit it out of the Knit Picks Mohair Silk blend. It's called Aloft. Number 15 is again a Caitlin Hunter design. This one is called Sunset Highway. It's another one that I saw a lot of people making a few years ago, and I think it's really beautiful. For my version, I'm going to use these 4 colors of Knit Picks Hawthorn. Hawthorn is a fingering weight yarn from Knit Picks. It's 80% superwash wool, and I think it's 20% not nylon but polyamide. I'm not sure, that maybe even be the same or a similar thing to nylon. But I've used this yarn in a couple of different sweaters. I think it's a really good yarn for the price, and it seems to hold up pretty well without pilling. Number 16 is the pattern Camaro by Tanis Lovelly. For the main color, I want to use this brownish color of City Tweed DK from Knit Picks. It's a wool and alpaca blend. And for the kind of V-shaped stripes, I have 6 additional colors of this Knit Picks City Tweed. Number 17 is yet another Caitlin Hunter pattern. This one is called Alyeska. I also plan to knit this pattern with some Knit Picks hawthorn. I have a skein of undyed hawthorn fingering, and I have these 3 coordinating colors of hawthorn. There are some small bits of color work in a bright color of mohair in the pattern. So for the mohair, I'm going to use this little bit of leftover Rowan, I think it's called Kid Silk Haze. Number 18 is Caitlin Hunter again. I'd like to knit the Koivua. This is another of the purchases that I made when I went to the Spin Cycle Supply Company over the summer. So this is Spin Cycle Dream State, which is their worsted weight yarn. And I'm going to pair it with Hudson and West Forge. Number 19 is a pattern by Andrea Mowry. It's called Pink Velvet. Now for the color work, I'm going to use the yarn that was called for in the pattern. This is Melted Baby Surrey by King Fiber. It looks really fluffy and interesting to work with. And for the main color, I have some Abundant Earth fiber, which is a company from Whidbey Island that's somewhat local to me. It's an island out in the Puget Sound. And this yarn is called Saltwater. Number 20 is a design by Isabel Kramer. This sweater is called Niam, and it's a fairly simple design, but I'm going to spruce it up by using some gradient yarn by the Blue Brick. I don't know if it's coming through on the camera, but it's also sparkly. So this is a blend of merino, cashmere, and then stellina for the sparkles. And it's sold by Blue Brick in a kit that's intentionally designed to make a sweater. So you have yarn for the body and for the 2 arms so that you can knit in one continuous gradient for the whole sweater. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it turns out. Number 21 on my list is actually a sweater that I don't have a pattern for. I had a really specific vision in mind for what I'd like to make, and I couldn't find an existing pattern that has all of the elements I want. So I'm gonna give it a try to designing my own pattern. What I want to make is a colorwork sweater with a white or gray background. And then actually somewhat similar to this sweater, I want to have stripes, but instead of the stripes being made up of dots, I want them to be made up of hearts. Almost a little bit retro 80s style. And I want the stripes to, instead of going in a gradient or several shades of one color, I want them to be rainbow. So for the background, I'm going to use this Knit Picks palette. This color is called Finley Heather. And I have, I think, 8 different colors that kind of form a rainbow. Now this palette line by Knit Picks, it's a pretty fine yarn. So knitting a colorwork sweater out of this is gonna take quite a bit of time. It's also gonna take quite a bit of time just to design or figure out the counts and so on for the sweater. It's gonna be a challenge, but this is the kind of challenge that I really enjoy doing. I like crunching the numbers and figuring out how to make things work. Number 22 on my list is a design by Andrea Mowry called The Daily. Now it's a pretty basic sweater with thick black and white stripes, but it's something that I think I would get a ton of use out of. I plan to knit it again with some Knit Picks yarn. Just in some black and white. This is Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Superwash Bulky. Number 23 is a design by Irene Lynn called the Misty Jumper. At my local yarn shop, I bought some of this Bigfoot Fiber Company or Bigfoot Yarn Company yarn with this pattern in mind. So this is a DK weight called Kraken, and this is a mohair silk blend called La Llorona Lace. I saw these and it just felt to me like this yarn and that pattern were made for each other. Number 24 is a pattern by Thea Coleman called Widow's Kiss. It has a really interesting looking cable design on the front. To knit this, I'm going to use John Arbon Textiles Exmoor Zwartbles. Now, an interesting thing about this yarn is that it comes from a sheep that is naturally black, or actually it's like a very rich dark brown color. So it's not been dyed at all. It does smell especially sheepy, which I don't mind, but when it arrived, my dogs went bananas. They just wanted to sniff this to death. Number 25 is sweater number 15 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And I want to make it with Malabrigo Rios in this super bright blue color. Now I saw on Instagram someone that made a modification to this pattern by they made a V-neck instead of a crew neck, and I believe that to do so they used another My Favorite Things knitwear pattern that's for a vest, and I think I would like to do that same modification. I really liked the way that it looked to have the cables come up and then split and kind of veer apart at the V-neck. Number 26 is a very popular design by Petite Knit. It's called the Champagne Cardigan. For this, I'm going to use some Goosey Fibers Squish DK. It's a pretty bright orange color, and I will pair it with some silk, it's silk mohair blend called Silk Hair from Lana Grossa. So I think that most versions, if not all versions, that I have seen of this sweater have been knit in pretty neutral colors. So it might be interesting to see how it works up in a very bright, variegated yarn. Number 27 is a pattern by Camilla Vaude called Magnolia Bloom. I'm a little bit excited for this one because it looks like it's going to be a quick knit. It's knit with some bulky yarn, but the result is very striking. I'm going to use this yarn from Drops called Wish. I've heard some really great things and some less great things about this yarn, so I will report back eventually as to what my experience is with it. Number 28 is a cardigan called Funky Grandpa by La Maison Relili. I'm going to use this Barocco Ultra Alpaca in 4 different colors. It's kind of exactly what it sounds like, that it's a funky looking grandpa style cardigan. And as you can see, I already have the yarn balled up because when I very first bought my ball winder, I was eager to try it out, and my kids too. My kids thought it was really fun, so we all wound up some of the yarn that I had. Now, normally you don't want to cake up your yarn and then just let it sit in cakes for a long time because the yarn is under tension, and that is not necessarily the best thing for yarn, but these are very loose cakes. So I'm not too worried about the fact that it has been sitting for a while waiting to be used. Number 29 is a more summery design called Camisole number 3 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. And I plan to knit it with this Noro yarn that's called Kakigori. So this yarn is a blend of cotton, silk, and a few man-made fibers, which should be perfect for a summer garment. Number 30 is another very popular design by Petite Knit called the Ingrid sweater. I would like to make this out of this Blue Sky Fibers Woolstock worsted. It may be difficult to see on camera, but this is a very heathered yarn with lots of different shades that all kind of blend together. It's called Northern Lights, and I think it's really beautiful. All right, on to page 2 of the Ravelry queue. Number 31 is another Petite Knit design. This one is called the Sycamore sweater, which has some interesting sort of tiger looking stripes that are formed using short rows. I'm really intrigued to see how that works. So for the main color, I have some soft pink yarn. I'm going to pair this Socks Yeah DK from Co-op Knits with Fiber Spates Cumulus. And for the contrasting color, the pattern called to hold, I think, 3 strands of fingering weight yarn together. But I'm just going to use a single color instead of marling of this nice dark teal color in the same 2 yarns that I'm using for the main color. Number 32 is a pattern called Balan by Emily Green. I'm going to use a new to me wool. It's called Elsa wool, and it's a woolen spun worsted weight Cormo. So this is an undyed yarn, and it comes in a few different colors or a few different shades, but they're all undyed. It's just the color of the fleece. It feels so squishy already in the skein. If it knits up as beautifully as I think it's going to, it just might become one of my very favorite yarns. Number 33 is the Pressed Flowers cardigan by Amy Christophers, or Christophers. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. I'm going to use the yarn that's called for in the pattern. So I have some Spin Cycle Wilder, and then a really rich red color of Spin Cycle dyed in the wool. Number 34 is a pattern by Nora Gahn called Deliciosa. And I am going to use some more Harrisville Designs Highland yarn. It seems that Nora Gahn has been a fairly prolific designer for several decades now. So the couple of patterns by her that I have on this list here will be my first, but I'm looking forward to giving them a go. Number 35 is the very popular and beautiful Sunday cardigan by Petite Knit. And for this sweater, I am going to use some Nutiden. Back in November, I decided to jump on board the Nutiden train and give this unspun Swedish wool a try. It looks very, very delicate, so it's probably going to be a little bit challenging to work with. But I'm going to hold it together with some silk mohair, which is supposed to make it a little bit easier, helps you to not break it. This is from Shibui Knits, which is, as I understand it, a family-owned company that is going out of business because the owners are retiring. But it's very, very luxurious. Some of the softest silk mohair that I've ever encountered. And I think it's going to be a perfect pairing with the Newton. Number 36 is another vest. It's called the Korshaven Slipover by Tony Hodney. And I am going to use, this is a kind of chunky weight, bulky weight yarn called Jamieson's of Shetland Heather. Number 37 is a colorwork sweater by Jennifer Steingass called Drama. And for this pattern, I'm going to use more Newton. Now, back in November when I placed my order, I didn't think it made sense to place an order for just one color. So I got 3 colors, and the intention is to use these 2 for a beautiful colorwork sweater. Number 38 is a sweater called Vendre by Lori Versace. Now this is a big, bulky brioche sweater, but it has some increases and decreases that give kind of an interesting effect, so almost swirls down the front. I plan to use some Goosey Fibers Goosey Hefty. This is a Schitt's Creek inspired color called Maybe This Time, inspired by Stevie's character. And I will pair it with some Drops Kid Silk. Number 39 is another petite knit pattern called the Saturday Night Sweater. Now it's knit with several, maybe 4 strands of silk mohair hold together. I'm going to use some alpaca, some Surrey alpaca silk blend instead. This is Cumulus by Fiber Spates. Now to me this seems to be just what it sounds, a perfect Saturday night sweater. Something that I think would be perfect for going out on a date on Saturdays with my husband. Number 40, we've got petite knit again. I'd like to knit the pattern Mod T. I have these 2 bright colors. They're from 2 different brands, but they seem to go together perfectly. So we have Kid Silk Lace from Hedgehog Fibers and Twist Light from Madeline Tosh. I bought these 2 on a trip that I took to Reno, Nevada. That's where Jimmy Beans is located. And it's somewhere that I definitely make an effort to visit every time I'm in that area. Number 41 is a cardigan called the Chunky Dahlia V-neck cardigan by Lene Holm Samso. So this is another design that is very bulky, so I imagine it's going to knit up very quickly, but with a pretty striking result because it has these lace leaves around the yoke. Now yellow is one of my favorite colors, so I'm going to pair this nice yellow Cascade 128 Superwash with Cumulus by Fiber Spates. Now, I think I've mentioned Cumulus by Fiber Spates, I don't know, at least 4 times by now. It's just such a beautiful, cozy, soft yarn that the first time that I tried it, I immediately went and bought some more because I love it that much. Okay, we're getting toward the end of the list, finally. 42 is another design that I don't actually have a pattern for. And it's kind of an ambitious idea that I have in mind. I, a couple years ago, knit a pattern that had a yoke that was knit in garter stitch with short rows sideways. So it was actually knit in this direction all the way around and then grafted. And when I knit that, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to knit a design like that where on the yoke it looks like the wedges of a piece of citrus fruit, like a lemon or a lime. And I would need to figure all that out myself. But I do love challenges like that. So I want to give it a try. I have some very bright colors from Pearl Soho in Linen Quill. This is a yarn that I've heard many knitters rave about, but that I haven't used myself. So I thought this would be a fun opportunity to try it. This is a sweater that is probably going to be a lot of work, and it's possible that the vision that I have in my mind won't in fact work out. But with these yarns, these pretty colors that go together, I'm sure I can find something that I love to make. Number 43 is another sweater that I don't have a pattern for. I want to make just a big, cozy, cabled sweater with big, chunky cables using this cascade yarn called Andean Dream. So if I remember, this is made out of llama. Yeah, 40% baby llama, 40% merino wool, and 20% nylon. Number 44 is a pattern called the Knit Words sweater by Corey Eichelberger. And it's based on a tunic that she made for herself to wear to Rhinebeck one year. Now this pattern spells out knit, purl, and yarn along the yoke. And I think it would be fun to make a sweater that says knit, purl, love. So I will be making some modifications. I will likely make quite a few other modifications, such as inserting some short rows. I don't believe there's any short rows in the back. And I might even add some additional colorwork elements like hearts. I have this wool and cotton blend yarn, which should be nice because I plan to make this a short sleeve garment, so the cotton content will work well in a summery garment. This is a yarn called Sestari, and this is their rainbow collection. All right, number 45, we've made it to the end of the list. This is yet another one that I don't have a pattern for, but if I come across a pattern for a design that is similar to what I have in mind, then I'll snatch it up. Otherwise, I'll just enjoy the challenge of figuring it out for myself. I'd like to make a short sleeve wrap top with just small cap sleeves so that I could wear it either on its own in the summer or over a long sleeve top in the winter. And I want to make it at a pretty fine gauge in order to take advantage of this yarn that my husband bought for me as a surprise birthday present. It's from Cookston Crafts, and it's a lace weight merino silk blend. So it's very fine gauge yarn. It's 600 meters for 100 grams. And I imagine that if I pair it with a silk mohair, this is Drops Kid Silk, that together it will work up at roughly a fingering gauge. Wow, that took a long time. That's a lot of sweaters. Now I'm really excited because I'm going to run my program and I get to learn which project I'm going to cast on tonight. I've got my computer so you can watch along. Oh, the anticipation. My next project will be the Korshaven Slipover by Tony Hodney, using the lovely yarn Jamieson's of Shetland, Shetland Heather. Thank you so much for being here with me. Hey, so obviously there has been a costume change. It turns out that I was yammering on and on for so long about all of my yarn and what I want to make with it that my camera ran out of battery. I didn't realize that until later when I moved the video to my computer. So it's tomorrow for me, but I just wanted to come back and give a proper goodbye and say that if you're here, thank you for joining me. I'm excited to be doing this, having my own little YouTube knitting journal, and I will be back soon to report on the progress that I've made on my new project, the Korshavn slipover. All right, until then, bye.